The other issue we have to worry about is just how useful is knowledge. One of the big debates in climate science community is that we must communicate, and awareness is somehow going to help. Of course, there is an issue of what we mean by communicate itself, because, as I said, every media across the world every day has climate stories, and looks like media has completely bought into the climate change science and is worried and is reporting various issues and interviewing experts locally, remotely, globally, and so on. So climate message itself depends on its efficacy in terms of distance. So if you cannot see climate change, it can feel distance from everyday concerns. This is a problem for many of my rich friends who live here, let's say in Mumbai or anywhere else, where they just don't believe that a cyclone coming up to Mumbai or extreme rain and floods are an issue, or that climate change is a big deal. Doom and gloom of climate change makes us feel helpless, and this can lead to people disengaging. Climate anxiety is now a real thing, so that also has to be kept in mind. Dissonance. We deal with guilt about our contribution to climate change by rationalizing our behavior. So this is called rational ignorance. You know there is climate change happening, you know humans are responsible, you know you are contributing to it, but you don't want to really accept it. You feel guilty and you just want to kind of block it out, right? That's cognitive dissonance. Denial. This is our last defense against fear and doubt. When we just don't want to deal with what scary things may happen, we must just start denying it. Denial is rarely the result of ignorance. Okay, denial is rarely the result of ignorance. It can actually be rational ignorance. You know it and you're denying it for a purpose, to avoid the problem. Identity. We filter news and information through our identity, rejecting ideas that challenge our existing values and notions. This is called confirmation bias. A conservative may reject climate change because he's hearing about it from a liberal. His cultural identity overrides the facts. So cognitive bias basically means you ignore facts when the information or the fact contradicts your pre-existing belief. You'd rather ignore fact than change your belief. This is a real problem. So these identities are pretty strong and cannot easily be ignored. Okay. This I already showed. Why am I going backward? Okay. Climate science and expertise. Does climate knowledge matter? So here we are looking at linear and collaborative model constructs for a simple point we want to make. So knowledge production puts out knowledge which can be regarded as credible, relevant, and legitimate. Then there is knowledge exchange. So let's say you are just a scientist who's going to be insulated from the issues and just put out your knowledge, but some may want to exchange it with decision makers, where knowledge and decisions have to be made using this knowledge, and then it depends on the so-called uncertainty well. The knowledge producers may know how much uncertainty there is in the information they are exchanging, whereas the decision maker may take it and filter down the uncertainty to provide a basis for decision making. Decision making is often yes or no binary, right? So you have to be careful there. So co-production of knowledge increases credibility, relevance, and legitimacy, as well as the usability and the use of that information. Here you might think it's useful information, but whether it will be used and whether it will be usable are not always the same thing. Okay. Societal response also depends on governance structure in which this decisions are being considered. So if you have knowledge on this end and democracy on this end, whether you have high democracy or low democracy in the governance, and knowledge is high or low, is going to determine the adaptive capacity of that particular system. It could be a community, a state, country, whatever. So high levels of democratic decision making and high level of knowledge is going to give you higher levels of adaptive capacity. But if decision making is not so democratic and knowledge is high, then you can end up with technocratic insulation. So there may be elites who are just filtering the information and saying what decisions will or will not be made. This is very common already in many of the states around the world, which are not very democratic. If knowledge is low and democracy is high, then there is potential for ill-informed decisions. So, as I said, a decision maker may take the information, reduce the uncertainty because the knowledge is low, and drive for a decision because it's democratic, and then end up with ill-informed decisions or maladaptation, in fact. Okay? If both are low, then you are indeed going to end up with maladaptation, unless luck gives you somehow a better solution. Okay, so this is just another phase space looking at frequency of adverse impacts being very rare or very frequent. We looked at this before, and risks being negligible or catastrophic. Then you have spaces where risks can be acceptable or risks can be intolerable, and then you can have a phase space where risk can be tolerable. These are heuristic arguments. Of translating them is not always easy, but it has been tried in the case of rice cultivation, leading to loss of livelihoods and security of food supply, looking again at adverse impacts and intensity of adverse impacts. And in the phase space, there is 10% decline in rice yield for every additional degree. So you're going to get here where loss of farmer livelihoods and security of supply is going to be unacceptably high. And the adaptation limit basically is defined by the inability to breed rice varieties that pollinate with nighttime temperatures above 32 to 35 degree range, with no practicable adaptation option currently available to overcome this limit. Okay, so even though this looks heuristic, it is done with some science behind it, of course, including these uncertain information in terms of different breeds of rice and response to warming and so on, which we said can be complicated for the current state-of-the-art Earth system model. So let's come back to human agency in the next podcast. Since we are considering all these socioeconomic issues, we must go through these. So I've added all these to the book chapter, which is much more narrowly focused, and I hope these are helpful. But you can send me a message if you find it difficult to understand, or feel that something is confusing, or you need more information. Okay.